Alright, g'day there. Richard Musgrave-Evans here again, and welcome back. Now today, we are here inside the studio. It's raining outside. Bit of a lockdown as we all know, so what I'm going to do is, I'm going to get stuck into this. Now this should be great fun. Let's get into it. Okay, well, I've done a fair bit of paddling on the river, checking all the scenes out, and just getting as much footage as I can for my YouTube videos and whatever else, and just as reference in general exercise. But paddling on the river can be really good fun. A real experience just cruising down the river and just absorbing the day and absorbing everything around you as you go. Now the idea of what I'm going to do here is, I'm particularly interested in a new concept that I've got in mind, and that is getting all this footage that I've collected and playing it in the studio while I'm painting the picture. So in the background, I've got videos playing of my trips down the rivers, good lighting conditions, good birds, just the whole thing, the whole noises, the whole visual. And what that hopefully will do is bring you down to, or bring you back, remind you of when you were there, freshen up your memory and make you feel like you're in the moment again. Not only that, you've got the movement. It's not just a still photography you're copying or just a sketch. Everything's actually moving, so it's much more like when you're standing there in nature and observing nature. So I'll give that one a go, but it should be a bit of fun. So we'll play that and see how we go. I've only just got back from that trip, so I'm very fresh in my head as to what's going on with that. And at the same time, I've got a lot of video footage just paddling around the canoe, nice times of day and whatever. I've got a lot of footage of the cliffs at sunrise and sunset, the birds, just all the fantastic stuff that you get when you're out there. Now what I'm going to do is actually play that on the computer while I'm painting, and so that way I'm getting the feeling of movement, not just a still. I'm actually getting the movement, the sound of the birds and whatever, and I can be casually looking over at that while I'm painting the picture, and hopefully that will give me the feeling of being out in the bush, more like when you're painting plein air. Anyway, it's an interesting concept. I haven't done it before, so it'll be interesting to see if it works out or not. But I've got a feeling that it's certainly going to help, because you've got that feeling and that movement rather than the still. When you've got one photo or some reference like that it's working from, it's just not the same as having everything moving. So we'll give it a go and see how she goes. Let's go now. I'll just take this, and that's going to be kind of my horizon line, I guess. Now I'm just going to put a little bit of paint down to mark it, then I'll take that tape off. Just establishing a bit of an edge there. Now you can quite easily do this with a brush. In fact, it's probably easier to do it with a brush. But I just like to work with palette knife exclusively, so why not just do that? Set yourself a bit of a challenge. So there we go. Just block that in. This is just a bit of permanent crimson I've got myself here. Like so, just block that in. Flatten her off, I don't want it too thick. Alright, I can actually peel the tape off right now, so we'll do that. So you can see immediately we have a nice straight edge to set up the composition. Now I'm just going to use this as a bit of an underpainting. and I can let that colour shine through later on. It'll really pump it up. Pump up some of the, you know, the work. It's a beautiful colour. I can use the knife later on to scrape back and reveal these beautiful tones. Now, a bit of viridian green and yellow ochre in the mix, and just apply some paint here. Bit of burnt sienna with that, viridian green, yellow ochre. A bit more viridian green, yellow ochre with a bit of white, burnt sienna. Just get a feel of general coverage. I'll just go for a tiny bit of blue in that, just to cool it off a bit. Pull it into those reds. Okay, so now I'll just pick out a little bit of the cliff face. Just feeling it with a bit of colour and a bit of shape, not getting too precise, just a generalised feel at the moment. And then of course sticking the reflection version in also. At the moment it's all just feeling the composition and feeling the balance. Just locking the big impression in first and slowly working it out as you go. Always a bit of fun. It's good to match what's going up above, below of course. This gives you an idea of the chunky sort of paint I like to use. So I'm using the yellow ochres and the greens and the blues. I'm trying to key down basically a brownish colour. So you've got yellow ochre, burnt sienna and white. But at the same time, I'm then dipping into some of those blues that I had earlier and dropping them into it. And what that's doing is it's keying it down because it's the opposite colour on the colour wheel. You've got the blues and the browns are on the other side of the colour wheel. What it does, it keys it down so it's like a shadowed down version. So now I'll apply that in the reflections and also into the shadow of the cliff itself. Good thing about the palette knife is you can lay it on like that. You can really put the paint down. A lot of paint. You can pretty much see I'm not really working too much with an underpainting. I'm mainly working with just thick colour from the start. There's a little bit of underpainting, like the red, excuse me, but mainly it's just putting the paint on, and I do that because I'm used to working outdoors quickly and I'm trying to get the whole thing covered and finished in one go. And the best way you can do that is to put all the paint on at the same time. You're trying to get the effect before it changes. So you can't really put a thin version in, you have to go straight out and go for the finished painting right from the start. But that means sometimes, well, that means the benefit of working on site is you pick the right colours right from the word go. There's no like guessing what the colour is, you can see it in front of you. So if you can mix that colour, you can get that on straight up, nice and thick. And that's just a really great way to get the painting done in a short amount of time. Now the paint in these cartridges is really good. I normally buy paint in tins, Art Spectrum, This is also the Art Spectrum brand, but it's fantastic because you can squeeze it out of a cartridge like that and you can really get a lot of paint. Still though, my favourite is using the tin, and I'll tell you why. Because I can put a lot of paint onto the palette, and if I don't use it straight away, that's no drama because the paint has not had enough chance to really dry. So if I can get that back in the tin before it dries off a bit, get it back in the tin, put the lid on, and then bang it down flat on the ground, it'll pretty much be good to go for next time. So tins are the best for me, but second best is the cartridge. The benefit of the cartridge is a bit smaller and easier to transport. Now we'll just try and get as much of the surface area covered as possible, going for the big impression. Always going for the biggest difference between the finished painting and the stage it's at now. And usually that is getting all the important colours in right at the start. That's what's going to give you the illusion of detail and finish, not the detail. The detail comes second. The detail's the next thing once you've already got basic overriding colours and tones and shapes and composition. Then you can work out where you want to start applying the more highly finished areas, and it can be an illusion. You don't put high detail everywhere. The trick is you put high detail in the visually most important areas, and that tricks your eye, and then you see the whole painting is being finished. Now this is just a nice colour we're mixing up here. Plenty of chunky paint. It gives you an idea on the thickness of the paint. And you can see the big slabs of paint I've got sitting around. Now if I don't use all that, like I said, I'll put that back in the tin. So I'll just pick out some of the top of the cliffs, some of the trees that are hitting the sun rather than being in the shadow. It's basically getting the feel and the shapes. And of course, got to match it up below. There you go, just sort of. Now working in the studio for me, it's really, it feels like I'm working back to front. Like when I'm working outside, I'm observing the hue, the tone, the chroma, and I'm putting that down super fast. In the studio, it's fine. Yeah, the details are no worries. I can get the details, but it's all back to front. I've got to get those basic colours first. Getting those basic colours when they're not in front of you is not as easy as you may think. Sure, putting a detailed tree or a detailed trunk is no worries in the studio. But is it going to be the right colour and tone? So when the painting's finished, is it really going to give the feeling of reality? And that major feeling of reality comes from the big overriding colours. To give you an example, just stand outside and look at the landscape, but only look at it for about 1 second and then close your eyes, and then go back inside and try and remember what you were looking at. Now what you'll see in your head is the big impression. You'll see the memory will be all the colours and tones and shapes that form that picture. And that's what I'm talking about. It's not the highly finished detail. Try it one more time. Just look at a subject, quickly close your eyes and just remember it. Now that's the big impression, and that's what you're trying to capture when you're on location. Those major colours and tones, and then we'll put a few refinements in later on to give the illusion of a finished picture. Trick of the eye. Okay, now I've put in the shadow tones. Now with the cad yellows and the cad oranges and a little bit of white, I'm mixing up some beautiful high key early morning sunlight colours and just licking that onto the shadows, very lightly touching, because the paint underneath is wet. But the benefit of the palette knife, it allows you to apply quite thick paint on top without disturbing the underlayer too much. You can disturb the underlayer purposely and push and smear it a bit for the edges if you want to soften the edges of your light against shadow. But where you want the major light, just lightly touch and it'll cover perfectly over wet paint. And that's one of the benefits of using a palette knife, particularly on site. So I'll just make sure I've got some reflections lining up here. All coming along. There's a lot of work in painting a big picture. Even if it's as broad as this, there's just a lot of stuff to do. And it's not all about just painting exactly what you're seeing. You're trying to paint a pleasing composition at the same time. You're trying to get your eyes to flow through the painting, because you've got to remember, this is a two-dimensional surface. When you're out in nature, you're looking at a three-dimensional object. And you can walk around and see it from different angles, and so you're seeing and choosing to focus with your eyes on certain things. So your eyes and your brain is reading the landscape. Now what you've got to do when you've got a two-dimensional surface is the same thing. You've got to get your eyes to read it, which means you have to order it and compose it so your eyes can flow through. You've got to play some areas up to send the eye to it. You've got to key some areas down to restrict the eyes from going into that area. And it's also about shapes and form. Your eyes will follow certain things. Like your eyes tend to follow a straight line a lot more than broken lines. So in a focal area, if you put something straight and strong, your eyes are going to go to that. Now what you can do is you can lead your eyes into that via secondary subjects. Have the eyes move around the landscape until it comes to a grand finale in the focal area, and then has a bit more room after that to just chuff around the rest of the picture. And so, yes, it's about painting what you see, but it's about organising a great composition and then painting what you see. And also, when you're standing in nature as opposed to a photograph, you tend to look at the things you're interested in. So if you're interested in, on a particular day, just say you're interested in the gum trees, you'll tend to see a lot more detail in those gum trees on that particular day. But if you come back to the same landscape on a different day, and for some reason you're interested in the water, for example, you're liking the reflections, or you're liking the way the ripples are running through the reflections, well, that will be where you put your detail, because your mind is seeing that as the most visually important thing. And so in a painting, that's what you can do. You can choose what you want to have as the main subject. You can pull that particular thing out. It may be the cliffs, the light on the cliffs here. It may be the way the light is rippling in the water, or the gum trees. The thing is to order it. Pull out the stuff that you think is the most important and get the eyes to flow nicely through the picture to those areas. Softening that reflection. The reflection is always a softer version, particularly if it's a really smooth water like this. Reflection is a softer version of what's above it. Quite often slightly keyed down too, not quite as intense and bright as the main subject. Okay, so now I've got a lot of the paint on, a lot of the shapes, a lot of the forms. It's time to now start going for smaller things. Start picking out the edge of the tree. Start leading the eyes around with refinement. I've already got fairly much the big impression, and now I've got to convince the eyes that we're looking at realism within reason. It's always an adventure painting, always an adventure. Just keep reworking the areas, like I just want to make sure that I've got enough interest in this area here. And another thing, I'm working on the reflection there at the moment, and you get those beautiful warm and cool contrasts. Quite often the ripples will become more apparent if there's a slight ripple in the water, and on this particular day there was just the slightest ripple in perfectly clear water. Now you can see in the reflection itself it's perfectly smooth, but where the sky and the cliff meet is where you get that little bit of extra jumping broken colour, I guess you could say. You've got the orange and the blues jump right where the orange cliff meets the blue sky. But the cliff itself inside it is much smoother and flatter, and the blue sky water reflection is much smoother and flatter too. But where the two meet is where you get the interest in the dance. So it's all good stuff. Yeah, so this brush here, the rigger, is really a fantastic thing. Just very lightly holding it, and just the reason they call it a rigger, I think it's because originally it's done for painting the rigging on sailing ships. It's a fantastic thing. It's a really good way. I like to use the palette knife, but when you want to get a little bit of a fine, really fine line that's not straight, it's got a lot of curves and bends in it, this long head brush, the rigger, is fantastic for that sort of job. And the branches on the gum trees suit that perfect. They just sort of dance around in the light, and this brush really captures that really well. So now I've gone back to the knife and I'll put a few extra, it's a combination. You're constantly working around, big knife, small knife. Not really using brushes except for that rigger. I only use the rigger a little bit. But you're just constantly working around the canvas, never overworking and never finishing one spot. Not with this style of art, not with Impressionism. With Impressionism, you're constantly building the canvas up at once. Like I said, there'll be a few focal areas, but you're building the least finished part of the painting, bringing it up, bringing it up. Not just finishing, say, the distance and then working to the foreground. That is another technique that a lot of people do use, but that's more suited to a highly finished studio work. Okay, so I've got a large amount of it done now. Alright, well that looks like it's about it. Got the big impression now.